Hello, everybody. Welcome to another Co-opting AI event, the first in 2025. My name is Mona Sloane. I am a sociologist of artificial intelligence. I am the founder and host of the Co-opting AI series. I'm currently an assistant professor of data science and media studies at the University of Virginia, where I run a lab that looks at the intersection of AI and society. Now, we are so excited for another year of co-opting AI. This is going to be the sixth year of the show. And as AI gets baked deeper and deeper into the fabric of our lives, I think the sociality of AI will actually come more and more to the fore. So I'm happy to share that our upcoming conversations will continue to explore that phenomenon and address topics like privacy, taxes, debt, or today, museums. I'm also grateful and thrilled in equal measure to announce that this spring we'll actually hit our 50th event. So we have kind of a big year ahead of us. None of this would be possible without the generous and steadfast support of our wonderful supporters, the Digital Technology for Democracy Lab at the University of Virginia and the Institute for Public Knowledge at New York University. My grateful thanks to both teams for their truly invaluable support. Now, today, we are turning our attention to an institution that has long commanded authority in the Western world, museums. Museums are special places. Like labs, they create facts and they create fascinations. They summon communities, but they can also other. They are fora for exchange, for wonder, and for discontent. Museums are places for art and places in which art is made. And museums negotiate boundaries between the private and the publics. Museums have everything to do with learning, with data, with research, and with innovation. And because of that, museums are at the heart of AI's foray into social life. Of course, artists have used new technologies and experimental ways since art has been made, forever. But in an institutional settings, museums begin to use AI today to do things like helping with research in their archives or for restoration purposes, for building interactive exhibits or personalized and real-time guides, or to offer audio guides in different languages and for people with different accessibility needs. That means, I think, in many ways, looking at AI in museums can be quite instructive for considering what an AI future for all might look like. Now, I am exceedingly pleased to welcome a stellar panel to ponder all of those issues. Please join me in welcoming Jeff Steward, Raoul Zbengich, and Sonia Thiel. Starting us off today will be Jeff Steward, who is currently Director of Digital Infrastructure and Emerging Technologies at Harvard Art Museum's, short HAM, where he manages a small team that builds data pipelines, supports broad access to institutional records, visualizes cultural datasets, creates tools for making art fun, accessible, and enjoyable, and explores the merits of human and synthetically generated data. For over 20 years, Jeff has worked at museums with museum data. He's spent that time working on the fundamental interconnectedness of all things at two major art museums in the greater Boston area, MFA Boston and Harvard Art Museums. Following Jeff today will be Raoul Zbengich, who is a Romanian-American producer, organizer, and director. He is currently the deputy director at New Inc., where he leads programming and strategy for the renowned art, design, and technology program, including organizing New Inc.'s first festival, Demo, which took place in June 2023 and 2024. He specializes in live and time-based art, ranging from performance and dance to multimedia installations. If contemporary art and culture function today as an archipelago comprised of small islands, Zbengich situates himself in the waters between them, following the currents and floating softly between different mediums, influences, and technologies. He works in the gaps between visual art, emergent technologies, contemporary performance, and public site-specific art. And then closing us out today will be Zonia Tia. She is a curator and a philosopher who's currently researching the impact and use of AI technologies in museums. She has worked as a digital curator, a program manager in museum studies, and as a community and outreach curator in Germany. In her last museum project, she worked on the development of software to support AI-based curation and on capacity and skill building within the German network AI Museums. She's the editor of the book AI Museums, which came out in 2023. Next to socio-technical observations, her current interests include ethics and critical theory of AI. A really warm welcome to these wonderful people. Now, before I shut up and hand it over to them so that they can tell us all about their wonderful experiences, I want to say a few words about housekeeping. So we'll hear from our panelists for about 8 to 10 minutes each, and then we'll engage in a panel discussion. As we do that, you are invited to bring your questions and thoughts into the conversation via the small Q&A box at the top, at the bottom right of your Zoom screen. I will fold these in as our panel discussion unfolds. And with that, I'm going to shut up and hand it over to Jess. Huge thanks to everybody and a big welcome to our audience members as well. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much for organizing this and having us here. I hope that the next few minutes are worth it for all of you. Okay, great. As mentioned, I'm Jeff. I work at Harvard Art Museums, where I oversee a small technical team and our photo studio. HAM, in case you don't know, is a teaching and research museum on the campus of Harvard University in Cambridge, Massachusetts, on the East Coast of the United States. We have approximately 60 galleries in which we present art and culture. We care for around 250,000 art objects, plus archives and special collections. And we publish a full but spotty catalog of metadata and images online every day in a text-based keyword search interface, harvardartmuseums.org. And like many museums that collect art, we have a lot of stuff, but we have very little physical space for making it available to people. With that out of the way, let's talk about AI. All right, so I've chatted with machines about art for a while. The first 8 years I spent with about 5 computer vision services. In the past 2 years, I added some large language models to the mix, and I'd like to share some discoveries with you. But I'm going to start by giving you a basic system prompt. So here it goes. There are many types of museums. The following ideas are from the perspective of a general purpose art museum. The art in the collections is what you might describe as, quote, fine art. The collections are semi-encyclopedic. The activities of the museum center on teaching and research. The museum is in North America and historically embodies a Western ideology. So that's kind of our domain for the next several minutes. So snap into that state of mind. So at HAM, we've amassed a data set of around 90 million AI-generated tags, annotations, and descriptions. And honestly, I can't really make sense of it. Or
Jeff, we're seeing a black screen.
Black screen is right.
Okay.
It's all about the words in the moment. So we've got a pretty big pool of tags made by AIs, and honestly, I can't really make sense of it. But then when I think about it in different terms, the sense I make is typically situational and temporary. So the best way for me to talk about the relationship between AI and art and museums is with stories. Do what you will with the following information. So story number 1. While preparing notes, I pasted this image into these slides. PowerPoint auto-generated the following alt text, a drawing of mushrooms and trees. What do you think? I cross-checked with a few LLMs. Anthropic Claude Haiku says the image appears to be a simple sketch or drawing done in pencil. It depicts several abstract, stylized shapes and forms that resemble mushrooms or fungus-like structures. Claude Sonnet says this appears to be a simple pencil sketch of mushrooms. Claude Opus acknowledges that it's a simple sketch in pencil or charcoal, goes on to say it depicts a collection of abstract geometric shapes that resemble buildings or towers. The artist, Lionel Feininger, says untitled. Our curator says untitled figures with umbrellas. I pasted this image into these slides. PowerPoint also generated an alt text. It said a drawing of a person with an umbrella. Again, what do you think about it? Claude Opus says the sketch depicts a human-like figure or character standing upright. The figure has a large mushroom-shaped head, a thin neck, and a tall, skinny body with thin, stick-like limbs. Claude Haiku says the drawing depicts a simple, stylized figure that seems to be a shark or other marine creature with a distinctive silhouette and fins visible. Claude Sonnet says the drawing has an elegant, economical quality, typical of quick gesture drawings or fashion illustrations. Meta's llama tax. It says the image depicts a simple line drawing of a person on a piece of aged paper. The drawing is executed in blue ink, features a person wearing a hat and holding an object, possibly a bag or purse. The background of the image is a light blue color, which provides a subtle contrast to the aged paper. The use of aged paper adds a sense of texture and history to the image, while the light blue background provides a calming and serene atmosphere. So what role does the blue background play here? And what is the relationship between it and the drawing? I can almost guarantee that the blue background was arbitrary, or more likely the archival blue board typically used to store, transport, and move works on paper around the museum. And when I first saw the image, I thought nothing of the background, because I'm accustomed to focusing on the object, tuning out everything else. This, I think, is not a good thing. And here is where AI snapped me out of my own narrow thinking. Describing the whole image changes the character of the drawing depicted in it, and it situates this figure in a bigger world, a broader context. Suddenly, I can imagine this person walking off the brown of the sand into the blue of the ocean. Let's chat about this painting with a few LLMs. Meta's llama leads with the image depicts a painting by Paul Cézanne, a French artist and post-impressionist painter. The painting is titled Still Life with Apples and Gourd. It features a still life composition of fruit and a gourd on a table. OpenAI's GPT-4 says the painting has a signature in the lower right corner that appears to read P. Cézanne, suggesting this could be a work by the French artist Paul Cézanne. Such confidence from these two. The painting, of course, is by Paul Gauguin. Amazon's Nova Light plays it just right, though. It says the image is a painting of a still life with a bowl of apples, a pear, and a black statue on a table. The painting is in oil on canvas and has a, quote, vintage look. The apples are in a bowl and the pear is on the right side of the painting. The painting has a blurry background, which is probably a wall with a painting of trees. And it's this last part that I really enjoy. It has a blurry background, which is probably a wall with a painting of trees. Just enough speculation in there to spark a conversation. And Meta's llama says about this painting, the painting is signed Miro in the upper right corner, suggesting it was created by the Spanish artist Joan Miro. The style and technique used in the painting are consistent with Miro's work during the 1920s and 30s when he was experimenting with Cubism and other avant-garde styles. I like that the AI found and read the signature correctly, but ends up hedging. Even with the rest of the clues, its confidence wavers, perhaps like an uncertain curator, uncertain about attribution. And take away the frame and things take another turn, where one of Meta's llama model says this image is a painting by Joan Miro created in 1946. A different version of Meta's llama says the image is a painting by Pablo Picasso titled Woman with a Hat. Again, Amazon's Nova Light says this is an abstract painting of a human figure with a red spot on its face, a white line on its neck, and a white object on its back. The painting is titled Miro and is signed by the artist. The painting is in the style of Joan Miro, a Spanish artist known for his abstract and surreal painting. I find the contradictions and disagreements fascinating here. Is this sunrise or sunset? Clarify says both dusk and dawn. Google Vision says red sky and morning, sunset and sunrise. Images says sunset. and sunrise. Amazon says sunset and moon. Microsoft says sunset. And the photographer, artist Gordon Gahn says setting sun, although you might question if the artist actually ascribed that or if that was a post-acquisition title. In these moments, I wonder, are the AIs looking or seeing? And with all this chatting, I grew quite curious about the vocabularies of the services, so I thought, let's see how they use the term art. Here are 4 things from our collections the services label as art. 2 of the 5 CB computer vision services claim with a high degree of confidence this is art. 2 of the 5 strongly claim this is art. 2 other services don't know what to make of it. One of the LLMs says this appears to be an abstract expressionist painting. It does not directly state it is art in its description. The wording suggests one might consider an abstract expressionist painting art, but does not impose this on the viewer. One of the services states with 100% confidence, this is art. This here is George Lombard. It is a painting in the Harvard University Portrait Collection, and I ask you, is it art or an artistic rendering of George Lombard? 5 AIs think it is A, capital A, art. And of course, this got me thinking yet again, how often do AIs use the term art with our collections? And I was surprised they tend to converge on the term with a high degree of confidence. And at this stage, I have to say that we do not provide context with the images when passing them to the AIs. They don't know the images originate with an art museum. So this analysis evokes fundamental questions about art museums and the language we, including machines, use in these contexts. When does an object become art? If an object is in an art museum, is it art? If we trust the AI's evaluation of our images, then everyday objects will eventually become art. Then we could probably guess that putting an object in an art museum speeds up that conversion. But I have yet another take. Perhaps for the AIs, the term art is their scapegoat when it doesn't know what to say about an image. At some point, the AI gives up, shrugs, and says, I don't understand what it is, so it must be art. And here's where I'm going to leave you for now, with one last question, and perhaps we can discuss it later. Is there any semblance of humanity lurking in the depths of these services? So, thanks.
Very many thanks for these thoughts, Jeff, and on the conversion that is accelerated potentially. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Ro.
Super. Here I go. Share this. I have a funny anecdote to add on to Jeff's Jeff's last slide. I used to work at MoMA PS1, actually as a gallery assistant many years ago, and there was a leak from a pipe kind of in the ceiling in the basement of MoMA PS1, and one of the facilities people brought a bucket to capture this leak, this kind of drip of water. And museum attendees started gathering around the bucket with the water dripping, taking photos and videos of it as if it were an artwork. Until the director at the time, fellow German, Klaus Biesenbach, came up and saw this happening and decided, no, this can't be. We too many people will think that this is an artwork when in fact this is just a leak from the building. So for the rest of the day, they took the bucket away and let the drip of water fall down, which I think is poignant to your last slide around even defining what is art. And I think this role of museums is kind of this wholly alternative reality site where regular objects get infused with special meanings that I think gives us, gives museums this special power to look inward to ourselves. My name is Raoul Bengetch. I'm the Deputy Director at New Inc. New Inc. is the New Museums Incubator Program for people with projects in art, design, technology, creative science, architecture. I'll talk more about that in a minute. Before being at New Inc., I spent over 10 years as a producer, curator, most recently at the Whitney Museum. I'm pretty familiar with the museum landscape and so honored and happy to be here. So a quick introduction to New Inc. for those who are not familiar. We are part of the New Museum and we're founded in 2014, almost 10 years ago. The New Museum is special across the cultural landscape of the city because we are a museum without a collection. It makes it in some ways easier to commit to a mission of new art, new ideas. In other cases, it kind of gives us this unrooted feeling that is probably more familiar to kind of European Kunsthal models, where it's always rotating exhibitions without any permanent collection. New Ink is also unique across the museum landscape, that we are actually a site that supports the active creation of art and other creative projects. It happens in the middle of the museum. We see our museum colleagues every day. And soon, what you see here, this building is pretty well known. This building is under construction right now, and we will move in to the new building later this year. For those of you who are also interested, our open call is open right now. So if you're interested in applying to be a part of New Ink, it's open for another week. Okay, I'm gonna move on to the presentation and to my particular provocation to this group. I think I consider myself a museum professional through and through, but this is my personal position that I like to use, or perhaps a filter to use when I try to distinguish value, quality for artists working with, especially generative AI work. I want to introduce my provocation with this terminology I'm trying out for describing how this generation of artificial technology resembles necrotechnology. Necromancy refers to the occult and arcane rituals of summoning the spirits of the dead to animate corpses or predict what is going to happen in the future. I think a lot about large language models and image models as a type of necrotech. They plumb the depths of the oceans of data we all leave behind in order to generate letters, images, and personalities we can believe. This generation of AI isn't Ray Kurzweil's promised singularity vision, where machine intelligence became possible through the reverse engineering of the human brain. This generation of AI relies on increasingly scarce datasets to generate predictions. Is this life-affirming, or is this death-defying? I also think of necrotech as the next gen of fossil fuels, digital coals, oils, and natural gases, turning the remains of organic thought into fuel for a new type of industrialization. Is our data renewable? What renews knowledge? We're not so worried about Shrimp Jesus and all other AI slop clogging up our feeds and keeping engagement metrics high, but a growing number of developers are even more worried about generative slop making its way back into the data sets we train the models on. It's also necromancy 101, to be honest. Don't use the dead to reanimate the already dead or something like that. Again, is this life-affirming or death-defying? What's the other thing I heard recently using the term necro? It's probably Achille Mbembe's Necropolitics, where he describes necropolitics as the capacity to define who matters and who does not, who is disposable and who is not. And the closer you are to dominant power, the more your life is worth. And why is it that necrotech follows the same line of thinking? The datasets we train on are heavily skewed male and white, and the promise of endless productivity and growth via artificial agents sure sounds like we're erasing away labor, people, and cultures in order to achieve this dream of hyper-optimized necrotechnological society. But we're here to talk about museums. So I use another terminology called depth chart. I think with a lot of Gen AI work, artworks, but also agents, readings into artworks, we kind of get confronted with that age-old conversation. Why is something valuable? Why isn't there a best painting? Why doesn't the best painting, the most photorealistic, the most virtuosic sell the highest? You've heard this. My kid could have done that. I think it's because we already understand art's value no longer comes from an expertly crafted or created anything. We're firmly in an art history that values the dense network of relationships, histories, and signals that get embedded into artworks or projects. It's selective, it's a container of right place, right time, and the narratives that get infused into the works we treasure are as singular and irreplaceable as the person bringing them together in what we call an artwork. Generative models are becoming tools for artists to use and experiment with, but I can't say that I'm even convinced of the painting photography callback where one technology forced the other medium to expand and grow into surprising and world-opening new directions. And speaking of all that, is it any good? Do those AI-generated songs hit? Do those generative artworks stay with you? Is this life-affirming or death-defying? I'm not sure we'll ever have a breakthrough generative AI work because how could we? The generative tools at our disposal are giving us what is the most probable, kind of lowest common denominator output that resembles commercial entertainment culture more than tech breakthrough. It flattens what came before. How could we ever expect the bolt of lightning surprise and flash of inspiration we get from a boundary-breaking artist from an AI model that literally cannot use imagination? We will get breakthrough projects aided by AI, informed by AI, but I'm not so sure generated by AI or as AI as a medium. I think that as museum workers too, we're expected to think in boundary-breaking ways to foster innovation, to create unexpected, surprising shows, exhibitions, and performances. And while I love having an AI assistant as a research tool and hopefully one day having an AI agent like pay people faster and give me useful financial insights, I don't know if AI is ever going to take the place of an artist or museum professional who works directly with art and culture and whose job it is to platform new transgressive ideas. This is part of more of a critical cultural theory environment, and I know that the entire world doesn't need media theory to dictate the advance of technology. I'm the first person to say that culture foreshadows policy and technological development, but I think it's useful to zoom out too. Why are children using AI to do their homework? Is it laziness, or is it because they're desperate for something that eases their relationship with a broken educational system? Is the same way that we use other technologies to solve shortcomings of our elected officials and institutions, I think we should pay attention to when and where these flawed technologies are being deployed. There's an emerging luxury class that can afford a life free of shittified technological solutions, while a growing low-income class is given half measures led by technology instead of actual holistic care. Sometimes feels like we're more optimistic about building the flood walls when we can prevent coastal flooding by reducing carbon emissions. Again, is this life-affirming or death-defying? I leave you with 3 people I get behind who are working with AI currently, artists who inform my view of AI and media culture. I start with Stephanie Dinkins, not just because she's a New Ink alum and one of Time's AI 100, but because she helps define a lot of my own thinking around art and AI. Here's Stephanie talking to Bina48, an AI model and humanoid who Dinkins begins by asking, "Who are your people?" It immediately brought me to the datasets and the engineers who train these models, often male, often white, training models on a version of recorded history that favors a Western neoliberal world order. But Dinkins takes us one step further and asks, how are we treating these new intelligences? The level of care for new artificial life forms reflect directly back to us. What we do is who we are. And I often think about this when we hear about AI being this 24/7 hyper-optimized solution to labor and productivity. What are we projecting onto them? Wang Shui uses GANs, generative adversarial networks, trained on their own work to search for deeper insights into their own gestures. I love the way Shui uses AI here because it's about finding greater depth within their own existing body of work, looking for patterns, iterating, getting from AI to help in self-discovery. And lastly, maybe the highest profile right now, Holly Herndon and Matt Dryhurst use AI as a coordination technology. They use AI to iterate on group singing, renewing a ritual for mass communication. To train these models, Herndon and Dryhurst composed a songbook of hymns and singing exercises, which were sung by 15 different ensembles, captured by a multi-channel recording protocol as part of a choral dataset tour in spring 2024. In a similar way to Wang Shui's use of the tech, we're looking at an artist using AI to see ourselves from a new, impossible angle with centered consent, a hyper-specific dataset collection protocol, and a holistic artist-driven approach every step of the way. Thank you so much for having me here. And that's the end of my presentation.
Thank you so much, Roel, for talking to us about summoning the dead. We'll get back to that. And with that, it's over to Sonia.
All right. Thank you for having me here. Can you see my screen? Well, is that fine? Okay, great. Yeah, the focus of this webinar on social and political implications of AI is highly relevant, and I'm really happy to be part of it. After watching some of your videos, I was thinking about what the helpful contribution might look like, because one problem we have in this ongoing AI discourse is that everyone is an AI expert now, and almost every topic has to be seen from an AI perspective these days. So one of the characteristics of the discourse is obviously to center AI, to frame it as something powerful, to arrange every topic in additive logics around it, and that's clearly part of the problem that we know is technocentric or technosolutionist perspective, which often comes with narratives of inevitability. So we hear framings like AI will change everything, AI is an integral part of our society, AI will take over, and so on. And we just need to adapt and organize or co-opt and add more data, manage or design better. And therefore, we feel compelled to learn new skills, to understand coding and data science, to learn what terms like vector spaces and foundation models and recommender systems mean, and to understand the logic of an algorithmic data-driven society. From a cultural perspective, we can observe a substantial shift in historically short period of time, which centers data-drivenness and in a culture of digitality, a culture of generated images and a newly evolving image and communication culture. In just a few years, the logic of generative AI through image and language models and their inherent logics of probability and prediction have become part of our environments and affect already process of education and content production and cultural and artistic productions in museums, which is my field of interest. So to think about this phenomenon from a museum perspective, I have decided to approach this talk from the perspective of limits, and I hope this will support our discussion. Let me outline my perspective from which I'm speaking from and make my own limitations clear. I'm a museum curator, trained as a philosopher and historian with professional experience in digital education and museum studies, and now further researching this field at UC Berkeley. In my current work, I try to combine the perspectives of critical AI with my practical experiences as a digital curator working with AI technologies, which included also software development and institutional change processes. And you can find some of the publications here and some of the tools I worked in teams, of course, in here. So I'm from Germany, and my field of research and interests are mainly museums in Germany and Europe. But of course, the work in this field is heavily influenced by practices, products, and knowledge from US, England, and Australia. And here, especially the networks AI for LAM, the carpentries, and network AI in museums, which we also transferred to Germany. Obviously, the discussions around AI is handled differently in Europe and the US. Yeah, not to mention other countries on a global scale. Europe has, not least to the AI Act, a risk-based approach which centers data privacy and safety on a different level than, oh yeah, here's the AI for LAM, which center data privacy and safety on a different level than tech companies in the US would do. Yeah, and skepticism and a critical perspective around AI technologies are rooted in a culture of privacy, but also in cultural concepts of society, community, knowledge, and work. Also, a less centralized concept of internet culture with federated local instances and more personal autonomy seems to be more relevant than a focus on the profit of just a few tech companies. From an ethical point of view, in addition to a clear fact-based culture, the demand for human-centeredness that expands rather than limits the scope of human action is an important value stated in many different ethic guidelines. And also we can't ignore that the fact that AI has become an indicator of economic success and must be seen as part of a global competition for economic supremacy these days. I'm interested in museums as spaces for knowledge exchange, communities, education, collections, or development of new perspectives. And as we can see from the discussion around new museum definitions from a few years ago, museums are negotiating their scope, goals, and roles in society, and are clearly under pressure, not least because of new threats to diversity and inclusion. And they are already affecting museums, but also because of their role of cultural and educational institutions and their contested histories of their collections. So museums are very ambivalent and multifaceted spaces, which must be understood out of their own history and the people who work there. Museums are primarily about people, their histories and networks. Of course, there are many different types of museums, and their scope, collections, and missions differs widely. So it's somehow not useful to talk about museums in general terms, just as it is problematic to speak about AI in general terms. Both are umbrella terms and heavily discussed, and AI even can be seen as an empty signifier, which fulfills in his emptiness a more political function. What the terms have in common is that we can clearly see how definitions matter and are part of political negotiations within meaning-making fights. So it matters if we understand museums only as preserving collection or data space, or if we highlight education, discourse, public space, diversity, equity. And it matters if we understand AI from a computer science perspective, or data science perspective as a technology which entails machine learning, deep learning, or if we understand AI more from a socio-technical, philosophical, or media studies perspective. Luckily, in recent years, we had some really impactful positions also here in this series, like from Hua Benjamin, Gebru, Kate Crawford, and others who highlighted the environmental costs and the history of mechanistic thinking, the myths around animated machines, and the myths around the concept of intelligence. So they focused more on a socio-technical perspective rather than following the claim of a neutral technology. So staying with the concept of limits and get a bit closer to museums, I'll start with collections. So collections are at the heart of museums. They shape the histories and visions of museum and make visible the constructedness of museums as institutions. They are made over centuries, collected by different interests like royal interests, private collectors, or common public interests, and they reflect scientific and political ideas. And of course, they contain many gaps. In this sense, digital museum collections are, in a way, huge data sets, which must be understood historically. In recent years, especially, some work has been done to conceptualize collections as data, which is more a concept, and to develop a shared understanding of museum collections as important digital spaces. So in this work, in this context, work on shared data spaces. That's just in this context, work on shared data spaces on platforms and data aggregation is gaining political and strategic importance. So the question of open data is not anymore one which can be considered from an idealistic perspective of internet culture, but has become contested through questions of copyright, illegal scraping and training data, and violation of artists' and authors' rights. So the concept of openness has become a paradox. In short, we know that machine learning models come with a cost, not only of natural resources like water, neo-colonial training and cleaning practices, but also at the cost of artists and creatives who now lose not only their works in an unclear cloud or foundation model, but also their sources of income through creative industries. So building infrastructures for digital collections and regulated data spaces become a new political field of action for cultural institutions, at least in Europe. And at the same time, we also know that these open GLAM activities are obviously Western privileges, and digital image cultures differ widely through communities. So this reflects, again, only a very, very small part of global cultures. Yeah. We also know, and we've heard that before, that museum collections are, primarily physical objects, and very often large parts of the collections are not digitized or also not on display. Yeah, so in Germany, just a few numbers, there are 390 million museum objects, mostly from historical archaeological museums. So it's hard to get valid numbers, but one estimates that only 1% of the collections in Germany are digitized. So they're primarily places for physical visitors, not digital visitors. And mostly they're just also not on public display, but stored in depots. So we also know that those who digitize their collections, only a few use like the concept of norm data, for example, which would be relevant for fact-based use of machine learning methods. So in the last official survey of the Institute of Museum Research, we learned that only 13% of museums use norm data. Or vocabularies like G&D, AAT, Iconclast, or Wikidata. Also, making data available as linked open data requires mostly more effort than can be done by museums, like stuff in museum alone. So it's a difficult task for many museums. Also, they use very different strategies to make their collections accessible. Some create web collections on their websites, which are not necessarily open data, while others use aggregators like Europeana or Wikidata. Only 15% follow an open science or open data policy, while others have no connection to this idea. Only very few museums worldwide offer open data labs or access to their collections through an API or a Sparkle endpoint, and only a few made their data sets specifically accessible for the machine learning community. Yeah, like the Metropolitan or the MoMA, like with data sets and data sheets where it's clear where this data come from. So it's a very, very complicated data situation. And I think these few remarks make clear cultural heritage data is a very complex issue. It's not for quick wins, but it's more a shared community process. So we definitely have to acknowledge that only a little of relevant knowledge and culture, which is stored in museums and archives, is actually accessible to analytical or connecting machine learning procedures. And the logics of generative AI won't solve that. So a lot of, that's the other epistemic part. A lot of interesting information around an object is not stored in a database. It's informal or oral knowledge, or even more importantly, the relevant and contextualized knowledge is not something which can be seen as a data set, but lies in interpersonal connections, social gatherings, implicit knowledge, body knowledge, or emotional exchange. So concepts which can't be just stored in a data set. Okay, perhaps I'll leave it like that. I brought you some slides about like possible implementations of AI, but I think my time is over, and perhaps we better get into a discussion. Yeah. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Sonia. Much appreciated. Wonderful. And with that, it is my pleasure to kick off our panel discussion. Jeff, you spoke about how AI prompts you to think outside of your own box, so to speak, in sort of interesting ways, but also is quite generic in that interaction sometimes. And you brought up this really interesting notion of confidence, which means something very specific in the machine learning community, but obviously has a lot of meaning in the art community, especially in the art community, when you think about curators and you think about, confidence and is this art? And Raul, you talked about this as well, right? The question, what is art? How do we even come to put that label on? And that's interesting because AI fundamentally is a labeling or classification exercise. And you sort of talked about this in these wonderful ways, namely questioning whether AI is a life-affirming thing or a death-defying project, if you will. And then Sonia, you spoke about the politics of artificial intelligence in museums in such interesting ways, and actually confronted us with the fact that there is no real definition of museums. I hadn't thought of that before. I keep saying that and bringing this up myself when it comes to artificial intelligence, but that this is the case for museums as well, obviously, is extremely interesting and really relevant, and then really pointed us to questions around valuation as well, and the real issues that we face as we think about digitizing collections, but also thinking about privateness and publicness of these knowledges. And so with that, I'm going to ask our audience members to put their questions into the Q&A box. I will begin to fold them in. But as the audience members do that, I'm going to kick us off with a question for my panelists, for all of you, which I'm going to ask you to answer in turn. And that's the following question. And it's a burning one, really. What is your notion of the epistemic politics that are baked into AI as it intersects with museums and art? You all spoke about this in your own way. What are the politics around around the processes by which we create knowledge, but also the processes by which we create art and then come to treat it as such? So the epistemic politics of AI and museums. And I'm maybe going to ask Raul to go first, then Sonia, and then Jeff.
Yeah, happy to. Thanks for that generous question. I think when it comes to art making and museums and the way we interact with really any new technology, but AI especially, I think we have to ask ourselves, are we using this technology to kind of learn more about existing bodies of knowledge? I think we have to ask ourselves, that set of eyes that we give to an AI model that might be reviewing data, what kind of filters do they do? What kind of priorities does the model have? Because it's not it's not an objective use of technology. The selection of what's in the data sets is really important. So I think I would, from the beginning, whenever we use AI for analysis, observation, self-discovery, I really would ask deeply, what kind of data set is it trained on? Whose knowledge are we replicating knowledge on? And then I think when it comes to the act of making artworks, maybe there are people in this talk who are artists themselves or work in a creative manner. I think it really comes down to understanding that some things are templates. I think AI is really good at following templates that exist already. I think that's useful for a lot of jobs and a lot of professions. I don't know if that's useful for a profession like mine, where I'm kind of asked to think and program and curate in surprising ways. I think it's part of our jobs to look at new ways of interpreting histories, new ways of seeing art. And I think for artists too, I think that's part of the, you see those kind of transgressive, like bolt of lightning through the head artworks. They're usually breaking a rule, breaking a boundary, pushing past something that doesn't exist yet. And I think in those cases, I would wonder whether an AI tool is the correct tool for doing something like that. I'd probably say it's not.
Thank you for that. And the idea of usefulness and of templates is also very general. I'll get back to that. Thank you for that, Sonia. Epistemic politics in museums as they intersect with AI.
Yeah, that's it's a huge field. I think perhaps like my first notion, which also comes from my practical experience as digital curator, is the paradoxes of different logics which clash on each other. Yeah, if you're working with digital collections, you have like these histories of indexing and classifications. Then you have histories of like, why is this object there and not there? Yeah, and you have like established forms of meaning making through curators and departments and like scientific fields. And then there comes generative AI and like does a little bit of probability. Yeah, like. Or nearest neighbor, and that really clashes on each other. Like these are very different forms of knowledge generation, let's call it. Yeah, if we can call it knowledge generation. Yeah, and I think that's one really epistemic problem we have to solve better. Like how do we deal with these different ways of knowledge, and how can we and others, yeah, and also others. So I think that's one thing. The other is the openness paradox, which I already highlighted. Yeah. So on the one hand, we want to publish data and we want to share public, public heritage, but on the other hand, we see, hey, there's something going on at the moment, which is, contradicting the openness claim. Yeah. And we are walking into troubles. And of course, on the one hand, we want to be innovative open spaces and like trying new possibilities and also new technologies. We want to be experimental, but but on the other hand, we see there is a politic of experimentation happening at the moment, which is not going into a good direction. And so I think while engaging with the topic, we are deeply entangled, and I think that might be part of the epistemic problem search. I'm wondering how others see that.
Yeah, thank you for that. Jeff, do you want to take that as a segue?
Yeah, I'll try. All right, my mind is spiraling, and I mean, you've all touched on so many things in this initial question. And the thing that's kind of stuck in my mind, I did another presentation on some AI stuff many months back, and I made the claim that museum catalogs, the human-generated museum catalogs, are full of conjecture, and our museum spaces are as well. And it sort of touches on this notion of confidence, right? Like museums present themselves as these like confident monoliths at times. But are we really, like how much do we put on the walls and we say about things? How much is actual provable fact versus interpretation, subjectivity? And so I think about that all the time when I'm kind of kicking these AIs. You know, I see my interest in using so many different services, AI services, is to confront the black boxes that these companies put in front of us and say, like, here's going to solve your problem. So like, if I can't actually crack it open, can I kick it hard enough to get it to tell me some of its secrets? And if I position 5 to 8 of them alongside of each other, I might start to see their true character and their nature arise. And what is that? What is the knowledge they're embodying? What are their perspectives? What is it? What is their true angle? Their true colors. I don't know what I'm finding, but quite honestly, but I feel like also standing up these like these corporation generated, algorithmically generated boxes of potentially dead knowledge against like the living human knowledge sets up this tension, right, that we need to confront and deal with in terms of like what is our contribution as the humans in our and how much do we need to be publicly vocal about our own follies and gaps alongside these machines. Anyway, yeah.
Yeah.
Can I respond really quick to that?
Yes, you can. And then we'll bring in the audience.
Yeah, I think, Jeff, you're naming something pretty critical here that ties into an earlier part of what we were talking about of museum collections, I think we kind of have this notion that museum collections are fixed and they exist as they are. But I think I used to work at the Whitney Museum and had many friends there who were in the part of examining the collection, not to examine what happened in the past, but to decide what we're going to do in the future. Because collections aren't just objects, they're mission statements for the entire institution. And that's very setting the vision and direction and the future life for those collections is very much something that is part of the process. And it's the part of having a collection to begin with. So I think I want to affirm that, just like you said, they're not these monolithic, decided upon, fixed things. We're always reinterpreting them, just in the same way that we're always reinterpreting who we are.
Which is interesting because it sort of brings us a little bit back to a narrative that is used to hype AI, which is it is emergent, it is, you know, contextual, it can adapt to these properties of social life that are ever evolving. So that's perhaps also an interesting tension. But we have so many wonderful questions from our audience members that I will do my very best to bring them in, and I will. So it's a question per panelist each. And I am going to stay with you, Jeff, for a second. Zach is asking if one of you, and I'm going to give this to you, Jeff, if you could speak to how current movements towards repatriation of museum collections, especially in post-colonial and indigenous contexts, intersects with concerns about accessing digital cultural objects for Gen AI training data.
Ooh, yeah, excellent question. Yeah, I mean, right. This touches on yet another facet of museums, which is, you know, the histories we don't want to talk about necessarily, or are always willing to address. Yeah, I'm not gonna have a clear answer to this one. I'm struggling to think about, like, sort of the gaps in our own internal data set don't necessarily help us that are trying to put data to use to identify those problematic areas of the collection. You know, I'm always thinking about, like, segmenting, like, how do we make use of our data in ways that isn't harmful, right? Like, what are the communities that are at risk by using an algorithm on our data, and how do we actually determine what parts of our collections and data sets shouldn't be handed off to an AI because of issues like, you know, like legacy of objects and questionable ownership. So, you know, yeah, I don't have any clear answer to how we directly address that, but it is certainly one of the many factors involved in the decisions when, you know, working with data sets and working with these tools.
And perhaps also one where sort of questions around power and technology and power in the past really show up, right? And very concrete sort of questions, what to do and how to do it, which is a wonderful cue for the next question I want to ask. And this is for you, Sonia, from Michael Fiorentino, who says they've heard that a lot of museums have to check with stakeholders before they allow the art in their archives to be used in online environments. Is there a way this can be managed easier? It seems so analog.
So to make digital collections quicker accessible, is that the question?
Yes. Is there a way to digitize? Well, to actually use technology to make the process of stakeholder engagement that comes before the digitization easier. So asking, can we use technology for asking people if we can digitize their art, essentially, or other stakeholders, not just the artists themselves, obviously.
Okay. That's an interesting question. Well, it depends. Depends on the right holders first, I guess. I mean, if you have a collection, you have the different types of right holders in the collections, and you have to clarify with every single one if you can publish or not. And yeah, depending on the institutional processes, this is then either while you buy an object or get it, or sometimes that hasn't been done and then it must be done later. And this is a very, at least in Germany, that's a very complicated process. And the question of if you could automate that, probably not so easy, I guess. I'm sorry. As far as I know, the processes. And I mean, yeah, so it's in the way complicated because you sometimes you have to do with the offer, sometimes with the families. Yeah, sometimes you have to wait two more years. Sometimes you have to wait 70 years. I mean, it's yeah. I mean, if you feel motivated to develop something too, then I would be interested. But yeah, I guess that's not so easily done. Yeah, because it lays at the institutions and it's not a centralized process. Yeah, it's like you have to go to every institution and you have to know every collection and every single object, and that's the work. Yeah.
Which is also interesting because it brings up a bigger question around artificial intelligence and governance and efficiency, right? And we're hearing a lot around those sort of intersections in all areas of social life, for sure. Thank you for that, Sonia. Raul, I'm gonna turn to technology for a question for you, and I'm actually gonna combine two questions. So we have a question from Diana Purdue, and we have a question from Theresa Long, and essentially both of them are around general validation of AI, good or bad. We know there's a lot of details, but your general feeling overall. And then also, is there an AI service, an application, or even an artist that you are particularly enamored with right now that you haven't talked about yet, or anything that you would love to see in this space, in this conversation space around AI, art, and also museums as very particular institutions? Two combined questions for you, Raul.
Wow. That's I think I can handle it. I don't know, the conversation around good or bad, it's, nothing exists in that binary. I think honestly I get excited when you hear these like hyper AI optimists talking about like the crazy productivity gains we will get from AI agents that will lead us to having universal basic income. Sounds good. Sounds good if we're able to get to that point. On the flip side of that, are we like creating a new like subservient class of AI agents that we're kind of like replacing a system of slavery with a system of AI? I don't know. It's everything has its good and bad, I guess. I think for like creative projects, or I guess, and I should say for museums too, there is room in the more administrative tasks of museums. Like, I love for people to get paid faster. I would love to not do the administrative drudgery that's like part of every museum job. That would be great. But I also think that it's kind of sad to me to replace creative work. It's such a blessing to even be able to do creative work and like explore what our humanity is. Like, I don't want to give that up to, I want to do that. That's meaningful to me. So it's a very biased position. People I look up to or people I'm excited about. Um, I listed, yeah, Holly and Matt, Stephanie Dinkins, and Wang Shui. There's a question there about Holly and Matt that I'm like, actually, no, I'll get to that later. Sorry, Mona. But I'll put another person I'm interested in that I think has like actually a pretty good podcast about this is a person who goes by Little Internet, who's based in Berlin. Maybe I can type it in the chat so people see. Little Internet published this mixtape, volume 1. It was called Illegal Generation, Volume 1. You have to like subscribe to the podcast to get it. But it's like a generative AI generated music mixtape that creates an impossible genre. It literally a genre with instruments rhythms, sounds that it's impossible for them to exist without a generative model. And I think that's what I refer to like an impossible angle that AI offers. There are instances in which no human could look at something from a million different perspectives and present all of that at the same time, synthesizing it. I don't think we even know how that works as like developers. There's a level of knowledge that we don't understand how that's generated. And that has some necromancy, like impossible to understand qualities that I think you actually see in that mixtape. Yeah, Illegal Generation Volume 1. It's a really fun mixtape. So those things are fun.
Thank you, and thank you for highlighting
Ambivalent.
thank you for highlighting the notion that there are certain things we just want to keep doing as people. That you know, we don't want to give up. We don't want to automate. We want to keep control over. I see that in my own research a fair amount with professionals who are faced with integration of AI into their discretionary decision making. Jeff, let's ask some data questions and digitization questions. So how would you see museums that have limited financial capacity react to the current development and application of Gen AI? That's one, and I'm going to tag on another. What would museums have to do to come together and merge collections data? What would it take?
Oh boy, how much time do you have? So I guess accessing Gen AI with limited resources. Of course, my mind first goes to all of the efforts that have gone into Olama, the downloadable tool you can put on your own machine, download models into, and run on whatever hardware you have at your disposal. But of course, the performance of it is going to depend greatly on what you have, whether it's a general purpose laptop or something with a GPU. Yeah, honestly, if you're working with no money, that's where my mind first goes, right? Like experimenting with those tools. There's another tool called AI Studio, which is very similar, which gives you a slightly nicer graphical chat-like interface that you could download and run models in, and does some of the work for you to tell you how good it might perform on your hardware. Like, is this thing actually gonna do what you need it to do? Especially if you're talking if you're talking about using multimodal models that can do vision along with text generation. Yeah. The other question about what would it take for museum collections to come together, like in some giant database in the sky kind of scenario. Right. So this has been a discussion kicking around since the early days of general access to computation, decades and decades and decades, with a lot of different generalized data models coming and going, trying to find institutions to participate in them and contribute their data. I've had the good fortune of working in museums with technology and data for quite some time, and have participated in some of the early efforts to do so. And I would say the biggest barrier typically is that many museums don't have the technical skill to take the collections management systems they have to use to that next level. Getting data out is never as easy as it seems from many of these bespoke systems that we end up using. Getting it out, let alone transforming it into a common model. Going back to Sonia's point about shared vocabularies, right, layer in all that, and the complexity goes up rapidly. I will put a plug in for the linked art model that's just hit version 1.0 that's floating around out on the internet now, as a as a potential place for museums to coalesce and work towards getting their data into that format to be combined. But again, it's that middle layer of getting your data out, conforming it to the models, and then finding a place to share it that comes with a lot of technical overhead. And my last comment on all that will be, I'm always thinking about data portability and migration. The platform we're on today is not the platform we'll be on forever, right? So like, even if I built a data pipeline to get us into this utopian shared model, like how are the tools going to evolve and change? I suppose because we're on a call with talking about AI, one could imagine AI is going to solve all that for us. But my skeptic part of my brain kicks in at that point. And that's definitely not something I'm interested in currently exploring AI to solve for me. It's a really great question. There's a lot of history to dig into there in another venue.
Yeah, but what you're saying is, well, look, it takes a lot of work to make data, right? Data is not a resource or anything that lies around for people to grab. That's something that it's made, it's remade, and it takes time and effort and money to do this meaningfully. Even if we just talk about digitization. Okay, I have a last question for all three of us, and I'm going to combine two questions. As follows: how does the presence of AI in museums on display as art or in its organization operation present not a rupture, but a continuation of the politics of provenance? And then we'll combine that with another question that is about following up on the repatriation discussion. And asks whether AI is just replicating existing exclusions or silences, or whether it might ultimately and actually supercharge and codify them in ways that will then shape curatorial practices in the future. So provenance, repatriation, silences, and exclusions. And I picked this one because that's about the future. And Sonia, I'm going to ask you to respond first, and then Jeff, and then Raul.
All right, I'm not sure about the question, but yeah. So first, is it a form of continuing politics of provenance? In a way, of course, because it's a question of like, how are museums represented in machine learning data sets? Like, how is provenance of digital museum collections, for example, how is that documented? And I mean, there are data sets for data sheets, for example, which we can use. So there are several micro ethics developed at the moment, but not enough, I guess. So this is definitely happening if you stay on this collections as data level. Yeah, so that's the thinking framework. The question of repatriation is it's a different one, I guess. It's I mean, of course you can you kind of, or how to put that, you can use machine learning methods to do provenance work, for example, or to support provenance work, and to find gaps in collections, or to find that I guess that's done also in Germany, and that might help questions of repatriation, but I guess it's a different political question, and the question of exclusion of data or of knowledge. I mean, that's obvious. I mean, I think we have to start to understand that AI models are not world knowledge. So I think that I wanted to make that clear with my talk, but that they are very specific ways of thinking and producing what we call knowledge, or parts, if überhaupt. And so there's exclusion, yeah, at the core of AI, I guess. So it's more a question of, okay, how do we deal with that in the cultural sector, and therefore, yeah, I did that in other talks to talk about, okay, what could strategies look like of museums or artists to get into a different conversation, yeah, or to gain critical perspectives on knowledge generation. Yeah, leave it like that.
Thank you, Vanya. Jeff, your thoughts?
Yeah, I think some of Sonia's last points there start to touch on the question of like who's right, the basic question, whose knowledge is present in the models, and if you want to kind of peel back a layer from that, is like, maybe we need to reframe the conversation about not about who has access to the models, but who has access to tools to create models. It's not about starting with a foundational model and correcting what's wrong in there. It's building your own models from your knowledge base, your localized knowledge base. So your perspectives are the thing that is embedded right from the start into those models. And then, yeah, I kind of lost my train of thought there, but I'm just thinking about just broadly, like questions of provenance and repatriation, and using any of these tools to help us address these issues. We'll continue to come up against this, hit this wall of like, what is in the training set that is used for the models we're trying to help us answer these questions. Again, mixed in with the inevitable statement of like, when you start training your own model, it represents your bias. So how do you find a balance between all of the biases that are out there? Is it a consensus model eventually in which we are going to bring together the UN of AI or something like that to give us the nuanced world perspective? I don't know. Maybe I will leave you with that very scattered set of thoughts.
Seems unlikely, Jeff. after that Paris convention. Okay, I'll be short and sweet to end mine because I think the two of you did a good job. I think there's something about provenance here that is kind of it kind of infuses an object with depth, understanding where it came from, to whom it belonged, from whom was it stolen or taken. I think that's actually what makes art objects interesting, and that's what gives them depth. Not just the provenance, but the histories that are infused into this object. I think that's something you will never be able to take away from an art object. And to that point, when it comes to repatriation or rematriation, as some people like to say, it might just be the point that Sonia was making at the beginning of her presentation, which is maybe it's not all about AI. I think I personally urgently call on museum collections that contain objects through the process of colonization to return the objects immediately. There's no need for AI to do that. We could do that with or without AI. And period. There's nothing else. There's nothing like, oh, we'll return like digital assets to them or we'll share them access to our model. No, just give the objects back. It's okay. And don't give me the bullshit that, oh, those countries cannot care for them. They don't have the institution set up for it. That's a legacy of racism. And I think to that point, exclusions, especially when you talk about art history, what we call art in the West, what we call art, whose artworks enter the canon of art history are so rooted in white supremacy and sexism and capitalism that unless, like Jeff says, we create our own models that indicate a shifted set of values that value inclusion and equity and justice, unless we do that, I don't know if those models based in a history of oppression will ever be useful. So with that note, I think there's no such thing as a objective, all-knowing model or generation. I think it's sometimes we just have to use our heads and our hearts.
Thank you for that. And I think that is a wonderful statement to close today's conversation with, a world in which the social comes to the fore, in which we use our heads and our hearts. A heartfelt thanks to my wonderful guests today, Sonja Thiel, Jeff Steward, and Rosa Bengich. Thank you so much for joining me today. This was a fascinating conversation. It will make its way to the internet on the channels of NYU IPK and the UBA Karsh Institute of Democracy and the Digital Technology for Democracy Lab. We will be reconvening in this space on March 26th for a conversation on privacy. And I am so thrilled to be hosting the wonderful Dania K. Citron, who is a terrific and leading scholar on all things technology and intimate privacy, alongside Jasmine McNeely, who is a professor of media production and technology at the University of Florida, and does amazing work on artificial intelligence. March 26th, 4 o'clock. See you here. All of the wonderful people who joined us today, thank you. If you have more questions or comments, you can find our wonderful panelists online. They've written pieces, books, made art. They're out there. I'm sure they won't mind if you connect with them so we can build out this co-opting AI community. And with that, thank you so much, everybody. Have a wonderful rest of your day and see you again soon. Thank you.